Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you so much for attending the virtual public meeting for the Regional Mobility Plan. My name is Lexi Petrella, and I am the Mobility Coordinator at the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. I'm very excited to present all of our draft goals and strategies that we've outlined for 9 counties in Central Ohio. But before we get started, I do want to go over some meeting notes really quickly. First of all, this meeting is being recorded, and all comments that or questions provided by our viewers and participants are considered public record. We will allow for individuals to unmic at the end of the meeting for questions, and each commenter will be given 2 minutes for any comments or questions that they would like to add. However, you're able to use the chat box throughout the presentation for questions. My colleague Bevan is on with us, and he's going to be making sure that we don't miss any questions when we get to the Q&A at the end of the presentation. As always, we ask that you be respectful throughout the meeting and whatever you put in the chat or say at the end of our presentation today. And you might ask a question that we can't answer during this meeting time. And if that happens, we will be reaching out to you via email, or you can email me at apetrella@morpc.org. And I have that here on the next slide. So this document is open for public comment. So you have until the December 19th at 5 p.m. to provide comments or questions, and those can be sent to my email. You're welcome to call or text me. I have my phone number on this slide, or you can mail us questions or comments, and you're welcome to do that by the time of the closing of our public comment period. All of this information can be found at morpc.org/mobility plan, as well as the draft document. So for some of you may not know what the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission is. MORPC is a regional council of more than 70 local governments, and we have a 15-county region. We are also the planning organization for mainly Delaware and Franklin counties. We do a lot of things at MORPC, but for our focus today, we're going to be talking about our transportation planning services to our region. So why is MORPC leading this regional mobility plan? We are already responsible for funding responsibilities for our region, and we have really close relationships with the counties that are involved in this plan, and I've outlined our 9 counties that are within that red boundary on this map here. And so we were appointed by the Ohio Department of Transportation to be the coordinating agency for this 9-county document. When I'm going through the goals and strategies, I'm going to be talking a lot about mobility management. For those of you who are not aware of what mobility management is, these programs mainly focus on encouraging awareness and access to transportation services. The Ohio Department of Transportation has a mobility management program where a lot of the counties in our state have funded mobility managers. And their role is identifying opportunities to improve access and awareness of transportation services. And this is a really critical piece to the regional mobility plan because we want to ensure that all populations, including those that are disadvantaged, so older adults, people with disabilities, and people with lower incomes, know what transportation services are out there and are able to find mobility options to get to where they want and need to go, and are aware of funding opportunities to help them be economically accessible to those mobility services. This plan has a 9-county region, and this region is called the Ohio Department of Transportation Human Service Transportation Coordination Region 6. And the HSTC regions were designed by ODOT through a study to group counties together for mobility improvements to improve connectivity and access to transportation to assist in crossing county lines and supporting quality of life. We're hoping that by performing a coordinated plan for so many counties will help us encourage regional coordination of programs and also improve individuals' ability to get to where they want and need to go throughout the region. For this document, we first had to start off by looking at each of our counties and being aware of what transportation services were available and what education and awareness programs existed to connect the general public to those different services. We then wanted to understand where the gaps were. So, where did we need service? What populations are not being served with current resources? And how can we prioritize initiatives to fulfill those gaps and improve quality of life throughout our region for all populations? We worked with a lot of individuals in the development of this plan. And most importantly, I would say at the highest tier, we had our regional steering committee. And this committee incorporated mainly mobility managers from the counties that we are serving in this document, but also transit agencies and transportation provider representatives, as well as social service representatives, all individuals who are aware of mobility challenges in their specific county and at the regional level. We also had county level groups that we met with throughout this development, and we called those mobility discussions. And those were really important because they were opportunities to focus on the local level with each county and take time to understand each county's individual needs and their goals for the future. We also had a survey that we distributed for a very long time between January 21 and September 2022. And this was really important because we wanted to engage with the public on how they get around and the different barriers that they experience so that we can meet those needs. We also looked at different data and maps to understand it from a more quantitative level. And we looked at demographics, travel data, and points of interest to kind of try to understand where we're having gaps in connectivity that we can focus on moving forward. And we also had public meetings at the beginning of this plan development that were, I believe, in February of 2021. And of course, we had our public meeting yesterday evening at 6 and today's meeting at noon. So what are our next steps? So right now, the draft plan is open for public comment. I encourage you all to look at this plan, look at your county, but also look at the regional drafted goals, strategies, and action steps. And consider if you think these are items that will help us move forward in access and connectivity with mobility. This opportunity will close December 19th, and you're welcome to send questions and suggestions for improvement. After the public comment period ends, we will be making changes if necessary. I'm sure we already have some comments for two of our counties that I'll discuss later. But we will be seeking approval from each county commissioner, except for the counties, Delaware, Franklin, and Licking counties, because those are served with Licking County and the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission's planning organizations. Those will be facilitated through the passing of formal resolutions because there is a lot of work that's going to be coming out of this plan, and we want to make sure that we are pursuing it as a collective region. When this approval process is completed, we'll be submitting it to ODOT, and our estimated day is February 11th after we complete the approval process with MORPC. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about our regional summary, starting with the regional survey data. Again, I spoke about how we had this open from January 21 to September 2022. We had a total of 3,217 responses. And that's a lot of responses, and which reflects probably how long we had the survey open. But we had 1,400 responses that included a valid zip code within our region. So individuals that listed their home zip code being in one of our counties. Some of the responses had invalid zip codes. So some individuals put their area code for your phone number, or they just weren't comfortable putting an accurate zip code. And that's okay. We have to be understanding that some people just are not comfortable with that. But I do want to highlight this word cloud that I have to that I have to the right here. And this is reflecting the responses provided to the question when asked what barriers individuals experience to using public transit, senior services, or carpooling or other options. And the significant barriers that are reflected here are infrequent and unreliable service and safety concerns. We also saw a lack of accessible of active transportation infrastructure as a barrier as well. So ensuring that not having sidewalks or safe crosswalks and lighting, things that make it comfortable to use fixed route public transit services. Um, through the survey and our mobility discussions and our steering committee, we found regional transportation needs that were pretty universal throughout the region. First is awareness. Second is awareness of funding eligibility for users. So that's more thinking, what funding programs can be provided to transportation users to make it easier for them to use services. Lack of a centralized location for transportation information, and that does connect to public awareness. Limited days and times for service availability, the inability to cross county lines. So when we have transit lines that aren't connecting to each other, varying available services in the region. So some of our counties do not have public transit services, so that is a significant barrier. And then inconsistency in safe multimodal infrastructure, which relates to the ability to use active transportation that I mentioned previously. So we have these transportation needs, but then we also have challenges that are in front of us to face those needs and to improve on them. And the first one that we have here is the siloed pursuit of funding. So that means that we have partners throughout our region that are pursuing funding opportunities with, often very viable and important projects in mind, but not in relation to what other counties or partners are working towards. The second that we have here is the lack of strong support for transit and other mobility options. So maybe that looks like having counties where major stakeholders are not in full support of moving forward in this area. Varying viability for transit. So we have many different types of geography and demographics throughout our region, and transit doesn't work in every single neighborhood. But a solution here might be looking at different models for transit and finding different opportunities to share service among private providers. But the varying viability is a challenge to having a really efficient solution to move forward. Second is the varying levels of outreach and also the capacity. So not every county in our region has a mobility manager to help with this. So that provides a varying possibility for consistent messaging and outreach levels. Next is inconsistency in technology. So to provide some context to that, if there are different technologies used for routing or trip planning, it might be hard to cross county lines with those differences in place. And then lack of operators. Many fields are experiencing lacking in workforce right now, and transit is one of them. And that is a very significant barrier to improving and expanding transit service in our region. So in consideration of those transportation needs and coordination challenges, we've identified three main regional goals with strategies underneath them. So the first is improving transit connectivity, and our strategies here are to identify opportunities for regional connectivity, researching and pursuing funding opportunities as a collective region, coordinating and maintaining transportation provider working groups, whether that be public, private, nonprofit transportation providers. And our second goal is to encourage stakeholder and public support for transit. Um, our I'm sorry. And our first strategy under this goal is to coordinate initiatives to build strong stakeholder support. to coordinate and maintain employer working groups, and to educate stakeholders involved in policy, funding, and planning decisions and transit needs. Our third goal is to improve awareness of transportation services, so to launch and use Go Ohio Mobility, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, to evaluate this tool, and to develop regional outreach programming for consistent messaging. I'm going to go through these action steps here in a second, but these are going to be very summarized. So again, I really encourage you to take a look at the draft document so that you can have a more thorough understanding of what we've outlined in this plan. So the first strategy under the first goal is to identify opportunities for regional connectivity. And with our action steps, we really wanted to outline how we are going to do that. So first, we just want to look at opportunities for transit service connectivity, whether that actually be in transit lines or areas of service or technology, making sure that there is consistency here. Our second action step is to maintain county level mobility discussions. Those have been really important to understand where we have gaps, and so we want to make sure those conversations continue. Our third action step here is to identify regional opportunities for multimodal safety and transit connectivity improvements. So looking at the MORPC Active Transportation Plan and ODOT provided active transportation guidance and building those connections between transit service and making sure we're providing those accessible active transportation routes to our services. And our last action steps here is to document our progress. Our second strategy under Goal 1 is to research, pursue, and support applying for funding opportunities as a region. First, we want to identify what grant funding opportunities are coming away for MORPC and other areas in our Region 6 area. So that's going to be really important because we know a lot of transportation funding is coming our way, and we want to ensure that everyone is aware of the different opportunities. And a really key piece of this plan is that it's helping us build a plan forward so that when funding opportunities come our way, we understand what our counties are working towards. So sharing that funding information is going to help make these goals possible. Our second action step is to support the pursuit of these funding opportunities as a region. So that means if a county is looking for a letter of support for a grant, that we can provide assistance in finding the right organizations to provide those letter of supports. Or if a specific organization is looking to pursue funding for an innovative mobility project that's accessible, we can make sure to provide the regional connection and improve that actual application to fulfill the needs identified for the bigger picture. Our second strategy is to coordinate and maintain transportation provider working groups. And this is really important because we have a lot of different types of providers in our region. We have big ones, we have big transit agencies, we have private transportation providers and really small nonprofit services, and we want to find opportunities to share these services and fill more seats and make sure that more people are getting to their medical appointments, to the grocery store. And so our first step is to implement outreach to these providers and then invite them to join a regional working group. We do think it would be most helpful if we had these at the local level as well. We're going to use these opportunities to share best practices and identify opportunities to share services. We also want to use this strategy as an opportunity to find ways to attract more drivers. If there's innovative action steps to do that, we will use this group to develop those. And then we also want to track progress and make the goals of this group a little more clear once it's created. Our second goal is to encourage stakeholder and public support. And our first strategy is to coordinate initiatives to build strong stakeholder support for transit. So first, we want to understand where in our region is this an issue? Are there key counties that pop out? We have identified that a little bit from our working groups with each county, but we want to take a little more time to focus in on that. And then we want to plan and implement outreach programs to elected officials, major employers, but also the general public. We want to make sure everyone is aware of the need for mobility initiatives, and that when the opportunity comes to expand and improve services, we have that public and stakeholder support. For our second strategy under goal two, we want to coordinate and maintain employer working groups. So this is a little similar to the provider working group, but a little bit of a different context. So here we're working with major employers and higher education institutions. And we want them to be involved from the employer standpoint, from, attracting and maintaining workforce and making sure that transportation isn't a barrier for their employees. And we want to connect this group to the goals identified in this plan, but also with the provider working group. And our third strategy here, I believe it's the last one under this goal, is to educate stakeholders on involved in policy, funding, and planning decisions on transit needs. So we're aware of the many needs throughout our region, and we want to make sure the people who are at higher levels in decision making are aware of them. So it's something that's prioritized. A first step here is to coordinate consistent communication between our steering committee and also the Ohio Department of Transportation, the Ohio Public Transit Administration, and other groups that really need to be aware of the challenges that we're experiencing specifically in our region. Moving on to goal 3, improve awareness of transportation options. We want to launch and use GoHio Mobility as a regional resource. GoHio Mobility is a specialized transportation search tool that is being implemented through the Ohio Association of Regional Councils and the Ohio Department of Transportation. It's going to be a statewide search tool that individuals, caregivers, social service organizations, and mobility managers can use to search for transportation services based on their starting location, the ways that they can pay, their accessibility needs, and what kind of transportation service they're actually looking for. And this will be launched in 2022. If you have questions specifically on this, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. But our first action step here is to train mobility managers how to use this. So we want them to be aware of how to edit their own providers as, providers enter and leave the market, as their eligibility requirements change, so that they can take ownership of making sure that information is up to date and really clear and understandable to the general public. We also want them to be able to share this as a resource. So be comfortable in ensuring that this is something that the general public can find easily through networks and online mediums for their county. And we also want to coordinate the launch with different partners. So with the Ohio Department of Transportation, with mobility managers, with social service representatives, so that it's something that can be easily found and utilized. Our second strategy here is to evaluate the tool's usefulness. So we want to engage with mobility managers consistently. I'm actually the mobility manager for Franklin County, and I continually engage with mobility managers around the state. And a really big piece will be making sure that the tool is working as well as it could be from their perspective. But then we also want to work with actual users, whether that be older adults in our community, parents of a person with a disability. We want to make sure that this tool is actually making their lives a little easier, helping them find opportunities to get to where they want and need to go, or to help in their loved ones' mobility needs. Our third strategy here is to develop a regional outreach programming. And this is more focused on making sure that our messaging is consistent when we're referring to mobility management, when we're referring to transit service models. Our wording is clear. Our wording is consistent throughout the region so that there isn't confusion, that we're using plain language, that we're using pictures in our resources. All of these things can be helpful to improve awareness of available services and how to use them. I have COTCC here, and that's just the Central Ohio Transportation Coordination Committee. That's what we'll be calling the Regional Mobility Plan Steering Committee moving forward, because This plan is not static. It's outlining a lot of work to come, and this group will continue to meet. But we're going to continue to use this group to share best practices for outreach programming and improve on that consistent messaging that is to come. Okay, so that was a lot of information about our regional goals and our regional strategies. Again, please look at the draft document to look at those action steps. They're going to be worded a little more in detail. So we very, very much appreciate your feedback and input on those. I'm going to move forward now by looking at our county goals and strategies. And I'm going to try to do this as efficiently as possible because we do have 9 counties. But I want to give you all a bit of a local perspective for each of your counties before we go into Q&A. All right. So our first county that we're looking at is Delaware County. And the first goal is to expand service and for vulnerable populations. Again, this is referring to older adults, people with disabilities, and people with lower incomes, really anyone who needs transportation services that are accessible. And their strategies here, I won't go into too much detail because you can look at our regional mobility plan for all of these. Is first to seek and use the appropriate funding to expand services. Implement a study to improve economic accessibility. Can the price of ridership for Delaware County services be decreased, and how can that be accomplished? Identifying and pursuing regional connectivity through regional coordination. Delaware is already involved in these conversations, so this is a strategy that is being pursued. Increasing multimodal transportation access, improving sidewalk and bus stop accessibility. All of these things will contribute to expanding services for the populations that we're focusing on. The second goal here is to encourage flexible policies to improve transit accessibility. And this goal is focused on working with appropriate groups to better understand, the needs from the point of view of human service organizations and other groups in Delaware County, and improve coordination with land use decisions and zoning. So making sure that transportation and access is something that's being considered in land use decisions in the county. Our third goal here is to increase awareness of programs and services. So the first strategy is focused on increasing opportunities for transportation in general, and then we move to focus on Go Ohio Mobility as a resource to build education and awareness. All right, and so now we're going to look at Fairfield. Again, if you have any questions as we're going through this, please put that in the chat, and I will make sure to get to those as soon as we're done. So looking at our first goal for Fairfield County, we're focused again on increasing awareness. And they are really focused on hiring a mobility manager. And I don't believe this has been fulfilled yet. But it is a goal of the county to fill that position for Fairfield. They also want to ensure that when a mobility manager is hired, that they're working with older adults groups in the county to understand their needs and to work on an outreach plan for major stakeholders in the county and the general public. Our second goal is to plan the coordination and expansion of transportation services. And this is focused on maintaining an inventory of available providers in their needs, whether that be operators, vehicles, technology to improve services. Additionally, they're really focused on coordination and working with regional partners. And again, working with Go Ohio Mobility as a resource for the county. Their fourth goal is to better utilize existing funding sources and to seek new ones. And I do believe our regional goal of helping share funding opportunities will assist them in this work because their strategies are very similar. And they also want to initiate a public outreach plan to determine most needed transportation changes, expansions, and education programs. So very broad goals but very important to understand the need at hand. Their fifth goal is to create a seamless transportation network that provides 24-hour, 7-day-a-week in-county and out-of-county trips. And this is really important because they're focused on providing not just expansion of service availability, but coordinating connection to CODA in Franklin County and other transit partners to improve accessibility of service. Their last goal is to provide mobility options that are designed to fill the needs of residents in Pickerington and Violet Township. And the strategy here is focused on implementing a public engagement plan to understand their needs for moving forward. These two areas or communities in the county were a really big focus in our mobility discussions, and we want to make sure that we understand their needs. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at Fayette County. Again, we have our first goal as being improving community awareness. This goal is really focused on working with different partners in the county, ensuring that there is coordination within and outside of the county, and then developing a public outreach plan. Um, they're really interested in finding innovative ways to engage with the public that does not involve in-person involvement. I'm sure a lot of our organizations are interested in that too, as we are still experiencing a pandemic. In goal two, this is focused on providing affordable transportation, and they really want to research grants and funding opportunities, and really focus in on how to reduce costs of ridership for services. And also, yeah, use opportunities for cross-county coordination to improve on that goal. For the third goal, we have expanded availability of a point deviation route. And this deviation route is in Washington Courthouse. And they would like it to run on weekends, evenings, and during public transportation hours. Their fourth goal is to coordinate emergency preparedness, incident management, and response committee, and the response committee to ensure that there's strong coordination with their mobility manager. And the last goal is to acquire more drivers. This was a really significant need in Fayette County as well. Again, why we made this part of our regional strategy development. Right, trying to move through these quickly so we have time for questions. Moving on, we're going to talk about Franklin County. And it looks like we don't have very much, but I promise we have very lengthy strategies that we've developed with our Franklin County partners. And the first goal here is to expand services for vulnerable populations. So here, very similar strategies for expanding services, coordination, finding opportunities to improve economic accessibility. But here we want to maintain expanded mainstream and mainstream on-demand hours. And mainstream is a service provided by CODA, the Central Ohio Transit Authority, and they have expanded their hours, but we want to make sure we can maintain those in consideration of workforce challenges that we're experiencing. Another strategy under this goal that I thought was really important was supporting the integration of bus stop and sidewalk improvements. And working with the Franklin County Engineers Office and the City of Columbus to ensure active transportation connectivity in bus stop planning. And second goal is to encourage flexible policies to improve transit accessibility. And the strategy here is to develop an oversight committee for at MORPC that administers 5310 funding. And this is something that we are considering moving forward. Our last goal here is to increase awareness of programs of services. These are all very typical of what we already went through, but they also discussed encouraging coordination among mobility application providers through API and making sure that technology is consistent to improve awareness. Okay, and now we are going to move on to Licking County. So Licking County was, really interesting to work with and helpful because they actually had a coordinated plan completed in 2020. So if you're interested in looking at their action steps that are already completed, I encourage you to look at their existing coordinated plan that can be found at the LCAT's website, the Licking County Area Transportation study. I believe I have that right. I really hope I do. But going through Licking County's goals that were already developed and are still very relevant. The first one here is to purchase and replace equipment in consideration of ADA compliance in vehicles and security cameras. And this is just really focused on ensuring that vehicles are accessible, that they are safe. Using technology to improve services. So we've had discussions on what technology they use and if they want to change that moving forward. Third goal is to implement a pilot deviated route. And this is something that is described in more detail in the plan. And if you're interested in what that looks like, I encourage you to look at that. They also want to create a mobility management program, and they did just hire a mobility manager. I'm not sure if she's on today. So this is really exciting. And they also want to make sure that regional coordination is prioritized in their mobility management program. And then they also would like to implement the deviated route service that was I outlined in goal 3. And then they would like to conduct a feasibility study for transitioning to fixed route services. All right. And if you have any questions about Licking County or any of the other counties we've gone through, please don't hesitate to put that in the chat. And now we are looking at Logan County. So for the first, I will say here that these goals have been suggested for improvement. So as they are right now, the first goal is to coordinate shared resources through the training of all providers, seeking additional funding through working with different transportation providers, understanding their needs, and pursuing grants and other opportunities. Improving access to workforce transportation by identifying most needed areas and pursuing van pooling and other resources to assist in this area. Improving public outreach by working with Go Ohio Mobility and implementing an outreach plan to identify most needed resources for outreach and education. And then also improving public perception of outreach. The last goal here is to identify resources for older adults and people with disabilities. And I will quickly go over the suggested changes here. And the first area would be the first strategy of goal 1 would change to improve to collaborate for service delivery. And the strategy would be coordinating and building support with neighboring counties. And then the second strategy would be using Ohio Mobility as a multi-county search tool. They're also interested in initiating formal agreements between county and county social service agencies and the mobility management partners to ensure that communication and outreach is consistent. The second goal here that we were looking at is pursuing efficient use of funding. And the strategies are more focused on engaging providers and ensuring their needs are being met, and then researching funding opportunities. The third goal that we looked at as a group was improving access to workforce transportation, and that one is pretty consistent with what we already have. The fourth is improving public awareness, and that one is consistent with what we had as well. And then I believe that's same. The only change here is that we want to make sure with goal 6 that we're identifying resources for accessible transportation. So there it's mainly the wording that's changing, just to make that clear with everyone. Okay, and so now we are going to move on to Madison County. We're almost completed here, and then I promise we'll get to the Q&A. In Madison, the first goal is to provide safe and reliable transportation for older adults and people with disabilities. So identifying funding opportunities, identifying needs, identifying connections, opportunities for connection with CODA, that's specifically called out. For the second goal, we're looking at increasing and improving education and outreach, still very consistent with what I've said with the other counties. providing transportation at a reasonable cost. And that's more focused on first looking at opportunities again. So actually finding ways to do this and then understanding how much that these trips should be reduced while still maintaining service. For the fourth goal, we have collaborating for service delivery, and that's working with different government agencies and employers, and then also using GoHio Mobility again. And then increasing in flexible and accessible transportation options. And the strategy here is focused on developing an outreach plan to identify the most significant needs. So I know I mentioned a lot of outreach plans, but that's because we want to make sure we're taking a local level and more detailed approach to engagement for the actual determination of what needs to be implemented. Okay, and then now we are going to be looking at Pickaway. In Pickaway County, our first goal is to expand availability and affordability of services. Again, developing a plan to identify how services might most beneficially be improved. And then using those findings and prioritizing resources for implementation. For the second goal, we have increased public awareness. Again, very similar, but they're interested in using Ohio Mobility to support their 211 service. So there is a well-known county resource that can be called. For goal three, establishing collaborative efforts with transportation providers. Again, very similar to what I said before, making sure they're working with medical centers and major employers. And incorporating new technology and capital to improve existing services. Oh, I'm sorry. And then the last goal here, goal 5, is to increase funding for public and coordinated transportation. So ensuring that they're working with human service agencies and the Pickaway Area Rural Transit Organization and making sure that coordination is happening to identify opportunities to improve funding. And also building support, whether that be with major stakeholders or the general public. Okay, and now we are looking at Union, and I believe this is the last of our 9 counties. The first goal that we have for Union is to provide safe and reliable transportation for older adults and people with disabilities. And this is focused on evaluating the improvement of services. Goal 2 is providing transportation at an affordable cost. And they really are interested in decreasing the cost per trip. Goal 3 is to collaborate for service delivery and efficiency. So using GoHio, working with different partners with cooperative agreements to have a formal approach to engaging that coordination. Goal 4 is increase a flexible and accessible transportation and using planned outreach to determine how that increase should look. And then also improve access to workforce transportation and pursuing different opportunities to provide more transportation options. In Union County as well, we also have discussed adjusting the goals and strategies, and I will go through that really quickly. And the first one here is to provide safe and reliable transportation for older adults and individuals with disabilities. So focus on one, the improvement of current services and making sure it includes a vehicle replacement program, and then assessing additional opportunities to serve the population, specifically people with disabilities that are not being served currently. The second goal here is to provide transportation at an affordable cost, and that I believe is remaining the same. But they do also want to make sure increasing ridership through targeted marketing is incorporated in that. For goal 3, and collaborate for service delivery, this has been changed to just and more generally encourage collaboration with major stakeholders in Union County. And goal number 4 here is to increase flexible and accessible transportation options. So looking towards that outreach to determine what needs to be implemented. And goal 5, I believe, is the same as what we had. All right, so that was a lot of information. Again, I really encourage you all to look at our draft document and, spend a little time reading through it. Maybe you just want to look at your county, and that's perfectly okay. But I encourage you to look at the regional section as well. Um, and that we, of course, appreciate all the input that you provide today and also in the future. So I'm going to go back to my screen here and see if there are any questions. We have 15 minutes left, so please don't hesitate to share any questions or comments. Bevan, I don't think we got any questions before, correct?
Correct. We have no questions, so we'll give it another
Okay.
minute. Otherwise, we can finish up.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. Thank you, Chelsea. We were working on this for over a year, so this is a long time coming, and I appreciate all the partners that were involved. It was definitely a regional effort. And I'm so glad to be able to do this with you all today. If there, I'm gonna, if there aren't any questions, we'll go ahead and hop off. But again, I appreciate you all so much, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend. And please don't hesitate to send me an email.